August 1944. The roads of Normandy were nothing but veins of dust and mud, clogged with wrecked vehicles, scattered helmets, and the echoes of war still hanging thick in the air. The Allied advance was swift, too swift. Patton's Third Army was slicing through France like a blade through soft bread, but fuel, food, and ammunition couldn't keep up. The tanks were hungry, and the front line was stretching faster than the lifeline behind it. From the chaos of logistics came a miracle of motion, a convoy born not from glory, but from desperation, painted in white on steel doors, Red Ball Express. By dawn, engines rumbled across the French countryside. Hundreds of trucks, mostly GMC 2.5-ton deuce and a halves, lined up bumper to bumper, their headlights piercing the fog. The drivers were young, many of them black soldiers from segregated units who had been told they would never see combat. Now, they were about to become the artery that kept the Allied war machine alive. "Keep her moving," shouted Sergeant Eddie Coleman over the roar of the engines. His hands gripped the wheel of Truck 342 as he scanned the endless convoy snaking ahead. Every driver knew the rule: no stopping, no turning, no slowing down. If one truck broke down, it was pushed off the road. The Red Ball had to roll, no matter what. Fuel drums rattled in the back, each one more precious than gold. Somewhere ahead, Patton's tanks were idling, waiting, cursing the silence of empty fuel lines. Coleman didn't care about strategy. He cared about staying awake, keeping his tires out of potholes, and not drawing sniper fire from the tree line. The radio cracked with static. Red Ball Alpha to all units. Keep formation. Germans are retreating east. Watch for mines near Argenton. Coleman smirked grimly. "Mines, mud, and miles," he muttered. Same old song. As the convoy thundered forward, the symbol of a red circle on white signs marked their sacred route, a lifeline drawn across a dying landscape. It was rough, dirty, and thankless work, but history was being written in the grease-stained hands of those who drove through hell to feed victory. By nightfall, the first 67 convoys had delivered nearly 12,000 tons of supplies. The sun had barely risen when the first trucks of the Red Ball Express tore out of the staging area. Dust swirled behind their tires, forming ghostly pillars that followed each convoy like shadows. There was no pause, no hesitation, only the rhythmic thunder of engines pounding the French roads, carrying the lifeblood of an advancing army. Lieutenant Colonel Lauren Ayers watched from a roadside map table, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, fists clenched. Reports had predicted the Americans would halt within 48 hours, trapped by the impossibility of supply. But the trucks kept rolling. Every mechanical failure, every blown tire, every detour over bombed-out roads was absorbed into the system like water into sand. Sergeant James McAllister gripped his wheel through frozen mud patches, sweat mixing with grime on his brow. Hours of Benzedrine had numbed his mind to fatigue, but his body screamed. Ahead, a destroyed bridge forced a detour over a hastily bulldozed bypass. He swerved carefully, watching for mines or German snipers, each one a shadow in the smoke and mist. Behind him, trucks collided and skidded, but no one stopped for more than a moment. The Red Ball Express could not halt. The African-American drivers, segregated from the rest of the Army in every other aspect of life, now formed the beating heart of Patton's advance. Their determination transcended orders. Their mantra was simple: keep moving, keep the Third Army alive. Each mile carried fuel, ammunition, rations, and the psychological weight of proving their worth in a world that denied them recognition. From the German vantage points, this was madness. Observers from the 21st Panzer Division radioed reports back. Continuous columns, headlights blazing for 20 kilometers. No stops, no blackout discipline. Unbelievable. Their calculations, honed through decades of blitzkrieg, failed. They could not comprehend a system that thrived on volume, improvisation, and the reckless audacity of a nation with endless resources. At midday, a truck caught fire. Private Booker T. Washington drove it 2 miles while flames licked the cab, delivering medical supplies before leaping clear. Another driver fell asleep at the wheel, narrowly avoiding a ditch, only to be awakened by his fellow convoy mates. These were the human costs of industrial warfare, and yet morale remained unbroken. Each driver knew that the Third Army's guns, tanks, and infantry were waiting on them, that every ton delivered was a step closer to Paris. By nightfall, German reconnaissance confirmed the impossibility. The Americans were not slowing. The Red Ball Express had created a rhythm of supply beyond all precedent, a moving river of fuel and ammunition defying every doctrine of European warfare. Exhaustion, mechanical breakdowns, and enemy fire were absorbed into a system that never stopped. Somewhere in the shadows, the Germans began whispering among themselves, "These are not men. These are engines made flesh." And they weren't entirely wrong. The Red Ball Express was no longer just a supply line. It had become a force of nature. The Red Ball Express had begun, a force of iron, willpower, and gasoline. The night was alive with motion. Headlights cut through the darkness like blades, illuminating the French countryside in harsh white beams. The Red Ball Express roared on, a relentless artery pumping fuel and ammunition to Patton's spearhead. But the closer the convoys got to front, the deadlier the road became. Sergeant Eddie Coleman tightened his grip on the wheel. Ahead, the remnants of German artillery ambush littered the roadway. Twisted metal, burned-out trucks, and craters gaping like open mouths. Smoke rose in black pillars, tangling with the headlights of the convoy, turning night into a hellish landscape. "Watch the ditch on your left," he yelled into the radio, his voice barely audible over the thunder of engines. Mechanical failures came fast. Engines overheated in the summer heat. Tires shredded on jagged remnants of bombs, and brakes screamed on the steep slopes of crumbled bridges. For every mile gained, the Red Ball Express paid a price in sweat, blood, and iron, but the drivers pressed on. To stop was unthinkable. To fail was un-American, and fatal for the thousands of soldiers waiting at the front. The African-American drivers carried more than supplies. They carried the weight of contradiction. Segregated in base camps, denied recognition in their own country, they now propelled Patton's army further than any European doctrine had deemed possible. Each delivery was a statement. Skill, endurance, and courage had no color. From a German observation post, Lieutenant Heinrich Führer watched the procession with disbelief. Their discipline is chaos. Their organization is anarchy. Yet they move faster than our best units could march. Calculators and maps failed him. Tanks, artillery, and tactics meant nothing if the enemy could supply more than he could destroy. The convoy faced its greatest danger when collapsing bridge forced a detour across a mud-choked field. Trucks sank into craters, forcing drivers to unhook trailers and push, sometimes shoulder-deep in muck. A flame burst from a leaking fuel drum, igniting 2 trucks behind. Without hesitation, the drivers accelerated past the blaze, allowing the fire to burn itself out while others cleared the wreckage. In minutes, the highway resumed its flow, unstoppable like a river swallowing obstacles in its path. At dawn, Lieutenant Colonel Ayers received a report. Over 12,500 tons delivered in a single day, more than German intelligence calculated possible in a week. The Red Ball Express was rewriting military science in real time, a rolling testament to industrial power and human grit. Even as tires burned, engines roared, and drivers hallucinated from exhaustion, the system endured. The Germans could only watch, increasingly aware that no ambush, no destruction of infrastructure, no clever calculation could halt this highway of fire. The Red Ball Express was more than trucks. It was momentum made flesh, and it would not be denied. Winter approached faster than anyone expected. Early October mornings brought a brittle frost that glazed the roads in treacherous ice. Trucks slid sideways, wheels spinning helplessly in frozen mud. Engines groaned as oil thickened in sub-zero temperatures, and drivers' breath crystallized on their windshields. Yet, the Red Ball Express never stopped. Corporal John Houston gritted his teeth behind the wheel of Truck 517. Ahead, a convoy of 67 trucks stretched into the horizon, their headlights cutting through mist and smoke. The ground shook with distant artillery. The occasional salvo aimed at roads the Germans thought they had disabled. Every mile was a gamble. Every turn could conceal a hidden mine, a sniper's nest, or a bridge about to collapse. From above, German reconnaissance planes scouted, reporting columns of headlights stretching for 20 kilometers. The soldiers below could see nothing but frozen fields and the endless line of trucks, yet even they whispered in disbelief. How do they keep going? Mechanical failures skyrocketed. Engines seized, tires shredded on hidden obstacles, and transmissions froze solid. But the Americans adapted instantly. Mobile maintenance crews followed every convoy like shadow units. Broken engines were swapped in 45 minutes. Cannibalized parts replaced shattered components. If a truck went down, others pushed aside, ensuring the flow never stopped. Enemy fire became sporadic but lethal. Sniper bullets tore through cabs. Artillery tried to strike the glowing ribbons of trucks, yet the Americans' volume strategy overwhelmed the Germans. One destroyed truck was replaced by 3 more in minutes. Mistakes were absorbed, losses anticipated, and the highway of fire pressed on. Even human endurance was tested to its limits. Drivers had been awake for 72 hours, hallucinating in the frozen darkness. Some blacked out at the wheel. Others kept driving with fists tight on the wheel and determination in their eyes. Each mile delivered not just fuel or ammunition, but a psychological hammer to both friend and foe. Patton's tanks could keep rolling. His artillery could fire without pause. The Germans could only watch. In the rear, Lieutenant Colonel Ayers monitored the flow. Radio reports crackled with updates. 5,958 trucks in continuous motion, 12,500 tons of supplies delivered daily. He exhaled slowly, recognizing the impossibility of it all. This is not logistics, he murmured. This is industrial warfare made human. Across the frozen fields of France, a German officer whispered to his men, "We train for tanks, for planes, for blitzkrieg, but never for trucks. They are unstoppable." And they were. Through fire, frost, and fear, the Red Ball Express rolled on, a testament to ingenuity, endurance, and sheer audacity. From a tree lane overlooking the Red Ball Express route, German officers could hardly believe their eyes. Convoys stretched farther than any map could depict, headlights piercing the night like a river of fire. Every bridge rebuilt overnight, every detour cleared, every truck pushing forward shattered decades of military doctrine. Oberleutnant Edgar Feunger of the 21st Panzer Division scribbled into his notebook, "We have never seen a force move like this. Speed exceeds calculations. Supply exceeds imagination. Discipline is chaos. Yet they advance unbroken." Soldiers in the field whispered stories. American trucks thundered past at 5-minute intervals, engines roaring through mud, ice, and cratered roads. The rhythmic pounding became almost a psychological weapon. Even in sectors where no direct combat occurred, the Germans could hear the rumble for miles, a constant reminder. The enemy could outproduce, outmove, and outlast. Reconnaissance reports were frantic. One unit observed a truck on fire, a literal inferno blazing. Yet the convoy behind did not slow. Another captured German officer noted, "The drivers refused to die. They push burning vehicles, repair crushed axles, and still deliver ammunition and fuel. Our artillery is irrelevant against this tide." Civilians along the route also became witnesses. French villagers, long oppressed by occupation, watched in awe as African-American drivers handed out rations, chocolate, and cigarettes along the road. Their generosity contrasted starkly with the German scorched earth policies. The Red Ball Express became more than a military operation. It was propaganda in motion, a tangible symbol of Allied abundance and inevitability. Resistance activities surged as villagers joined sabotage operations, emboldened by what they saw. Back at German headquarters, the officers debated strategy. Attempt to slow or destroy the convoys were futile. Luftwaffe sorties had been too few, too delayed, and too weak against an enemy that anticipated losses and replaced vehicles instantly. Mines were cleared by the Americans faster than they could be laid. Bridges destroyed were rebuilt overnight. Every tactic failed. The psychological toll was profound. Soldiers and officers alike began questioning their own doctrine. "We cannot defeat this," one veteran whispered. "They do not fear death, breakdown, or scarcity. They have endless men, endless machines, endless supplies. How do you fight an enemy whose industrial might is greater than your army?" Even within the German ranks, doubt spread. Commanders who had prided themselves on strategy and precision began to understand a terrifying truth. This was not a normal war. They were facing a force whose backbone was logistics, whose weapon was supply, whose strength was unrelenting momentum. The Red Ball Express was not just supplying Patton's army. It was destroying German confidence, one truck, 1 ton, one relentless mile at a time. By mid-October 1944, the Red Ball Express had become more than a supply operation. It had become the lifeblood of Patton's Third Army. Each convoy delivered not just fuel and ammunition, but relentless momentum, the invisible force driving American forces past German defenses. Lieutenant Colonel Lurin Ayers watched reports flood in. Armored divisions advanced 40 to 60 miles per day, distances the Germans believed physically impossible for mechanized warfare. Tanks and artillery moved forward, never waiting, never pausing. Every mile conquered depended on a single truth. The Red Ball Express kept rolling. Without it, the Third Army would have ground to a halt. German commanders finally understood the nature of the threat. It was not artillery, not tanks, not even air superiority. They could outgun any unit in direct combat, but industrialized logistics. Every destroyed truck was anticipated. Every damaged bridge was circumvented. Every mechanical failure was repaired in real time. For the first time in history, supply lines were more powerful than combat units. Private Booker T. Washington, driving a GMC 2.5, navigated a cratered road just outside Metz. His truck carried critical medical supplies. Behind him, 66 other trucks formed a steel river of headlights, engines roaring, tires chewing through mud and snow. When a German artillery shell exploded nearby, Private Washington didn't hesitate. He accelerated, weaving between debris and fire, delivering his cargo on time. Moments like these, repeated thousands of times, decided battles without firing a shot. Even the Luftwaffe's reconnaissance proved futile. Reports noted continuous convoys visible for 20 kilometers at night, running with headlights on, defying German military doctrine. Interdiction attempts failed because Americans anticipated attrition. They replaced trucks at a pace the Germans could not match. The scale of industrial America was a weapon in itself. The psychological impact on German troops was devastating. Soldiers at the front, hearing the endless roar of engines, realized the sheer impossibility of stopping Patton. Rations, fuel, ammunition, everything arrived as if by magic. Morale dropped. Confusion grew. "We fight tanks, we fight planes, but trucks?" whispered one German lieutenant. "They cannot be stopped." At the French villages along the route, civilians saw the flow of supplies and the generosity of the drivers. Segregated African-American soldiers handed out rations and medicines, a living demonstration that the Americans were unstoppable both in production and humanity. Resistance cells sprang to life, emboldened by the presence of these convoys. Sabotage and guerrilla attacks were launched on German forces, further amplifying the Red Ball Express's effect. By October 20th, every German calculation had failed. The Third Army's advance no longer followed traditional limitations of supply and terrain. Momentum itself had become victory. Armored divisions rolled over obstacles before the Germans could respond. Cities fell not because of overwhelming firepower, but because the Red Ball Express enabled continuous pressure, unbroken logistics, and operational endurance far beyond anything the Germans had faced. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, reviewing intelligence from East Prussia, wrote, "We are not defeated by tanks, not by planes, not by strategy. We are defeated by trucks, by roads, by gasoline, by the relentless will of men who refuse to stop." The Red Ball Express had proven that in modern war, speed and supply outweighed tactics and firepower. The Germans were learning a lesson they had never anticipated. Sometimes, the greatest weapon of all is momentum delivered on wheels. By late October 1944, German commanders grew desperate. If the Red Ball Express could not be stopped by artillery, airstrikes, or terrain, perhaps sabotage and ambush could slow it. Mines were laid, bridges destroyed, and concealed troops waited to attack convoys. Yet the Americans adapted faster than the Germans could plan. On a foggy morning near Charleroi, Private James Jimmy Robinson drove his 2.5 along a narrow route. German engineers had mined the road overnight. Ahead, a vehicle exploded, sending a shockwave of mud and debris. Robinson's training kicked in. He swerved onto a hastily bulldozed detour, wheels crunching over rubble, and kept moving. Behind him, mechanics trailed with portable toolkits, repairing damaged vehicles on the spot. No delay exceeded 5 minutes. German sabotage units became frustrated. They assumed delays and destruction would paralyze supply lines. Instead, the Americans used obstacles as opportunities. Destroyed bridges were bypassed within hours using temporary structures. Mines were cleared, neutralized, or simply avoided, and any lost vehicle was immediately replaced by another truck from the rotation. Each setback strengthened, rather than weakened, the operation. The physical and mental endurance of the drivers was legendary. Many operated 48 to 72 hours without sleep, fueled by coffee and stimulants, ignoring frostbite, snow, and mud. When a truck's brakes failed on an icy incline, the driver guided it downhill, dodging obstacles to deliver fuel to forward units. When engines overheated or caught fire, other drivers jumped in to push or pull the vehicle to safety. Every survival story became a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. African-American drivers, still segregated in the U.S. Army, bore the brunt of the grueling labor, yet their morale remained high, driven by purpose and pride. They knew each mile delivered, each ton of supplies, was a strike against Nazi ideology. They were proving day after day that industrial might, human endurance, and initiative could triumph over rigid doctrine. German officers, observing from concealed positions, were both stunned and demoralized. Reports describe continuous convoys running night and day, with headlights blazing through mist and darkness, drivers taking independent decisions to avoid or repair damage, and forward maintenance units performing near-miraculous fixes in minutes. They could not comprehend it. "They violate all our rules," wrote Oberleutnant Fwanger, "yet they succeed." Even as the Germans intensified air reconnaissance and artillery attempts, the Red Ball Express adjusted and evolved. New bypass routes were established within hours. Trucks were rerouted to avoid ambushes. Supply points were made mobile, and driver rotations ensured continuous movement. Every sabotage attempt became another demonstration of flexibility and efficiency. By November 1944, German forces were in despair. Every calculation, every ambush, every plan to slow the Americans failed. The Red Ball Express had turned the tables. Logistics had become a weapon of war. Sabotage and counterattack futile against the sheer volume, speed, and adaptability of the supply system. The Germans finally admitted a bitter truth. They were no longer fighting an army. They were fighting an industrial and human tide. Every destroyed vehicle, every obstacle, every winter storm was overcome. Every mile was proof that in modern warfare, persistence, volume, and initiative were as decisive as firepower. The Red Ball Express was no longer just a supply operation. It was a symbol of unstoppable momentum, a psychological hammer, and a tactical engine that carried Patton's army straight into victory by mid-November 1944. The Red Ball Express had achieved something the Germans never anticipated: continuous operational dominance. Patton's Third Army pressed forward, seemingly unstoppable, while German forces scrambled to react. Every advance was fueled by tons of ammunition, fuel, rations, and spare parts, delivered on time, without pause, and often before the Germans could even assess the front. German generals, accustomed to dictating the tempo of war, were now in a reactive posture. Field Marshal model, reviewing intelligence, noted with alarm that no counterattack or sabotage had slowed the Americans for more than a few hours. "We are no longer controlling the battlefield," he wrote. "We are merely witnessing the consequences of supply we cannot match." The psychological impact on German troops was devastating. Soldiers stationed near Red Ball routes could hear the endless hum of engines at night, a sound they called the River of Steel. It became a symbol of inevitability. Patton's advance was relentless, unstoppable, and fully supplied. Units who attempted resistance often collapsed under the pressure of sustained combat and American logistical superiority. In liberated French towns, civilians witnessed a different kind of war. Segregated African-American drivers handed out food, medicine, and cigarettes, bridging military operations with humanitarian action. Their presence demonstrated both American abundance and compassion, further undermining German control and bolstering local resistance movements. The Red Ball Express was simultaneously a weapon of logistics and morale. The physical demands on the drivers remained extreme. Many continued 48 to 72-hour shifts, enduring mud, snow, and freezing rain. Vehicles were destroyed, burned, or abandoned, yet replacements were always available. Forward maintenance units repaired engines and tires almost instantly. Every challenge became a demonstration of ingenuity and resilience, proving to both allies and enemies that the Red Ball Express was not just an operation. It was a living organism, adaptive and unstoppable. German attempts at aerial interdiction failed. Intercepted reports describe convoys running in tight formation, headlights on, using decoys and alternate routes. The Luftwaffe's limited resources could not match the volume and speed of American convoys. Attempts to destroy even 1,000 trucks would have required aircraft the Germans did not possess. By the time they responded, the convoys had already moved beyond reach. The operational statistics were staggering. By late November, the Red Ball Express had delivered over 400,000 tons of supplies, driven more than 120 million ton miles, and sustained nearly 6,000 vehicles daily. German intelligence, initially dismissive, now concluded that the Americans had created a logistics system beyond comprehension, an industrial juggernaut that could replace losses faster than they could inflict them. For the first time, German commanders confronted a harsh reality. The war could not be won by combat alone. Every tank destroyed could be replaced, every forward position supplied, every artillery battery fueled, all without pause. Their doctrine, built on precision, discipline, and rationed resources, was being overwhelmed by sheer industrial power and human endurance. The Red Ball Express had achieved its ultimate goal. It had broken the German will to resist. Patton's troops continued their advance with confidence, backed by a supply chain that seemed magical in its reliability. German defenses crumbled not only under fire, but under the psychological weight of unstoppable logistics. The operation's success also highlighted a larger truth. In modern warfare, industrial capacity, supply, and initiative could determine victory as much as strategy or tactics. The Red Ball Express had transformed the European theater, shortening the war, saving lives, and redefining the role of logistics in military history. By the time the Allies reached the German border, it was clear the tide had broken, not by tanks alone, but by trucks, tenacity, and the ingenuity of men willing to drive the impossible day and night, mile after mile. By December 1944, the Red Ball Express had entered its final, most critical phase. Patton's Third Army had advanced hundreds of miles from the Normandy beaches, liberating cities, defeating German units, and sustaining momentum that seemed impossible without continuous supply. Yet the strain on logistics was intensifying. Round-trip distances had grown to over 700 miles, vehicles were worn to the limit, and drivers were approaching the edge of human endurance. American engineers, mechanics, and planners responded with ingenuity. Intermediate supply points were established to cut down travel distances. Mobile maintenance units were doubled, and driver rotations ensured that even exhausted men could be replaced without interrupting the flow of supplies. Forward fuel and ammunition dumps were strategically placed every 25 miles, allowing armored divisions to advance without pause. German forces, now retreating and increasingly desperate, tried to exploit the long supply lines. Ambushes, mines, and artillery bombardments were employed wherever possible. Yet every attempt was met with flexible countermeasures. Damaged vehicles were repaired on the roadside, blocked roads bypassed, and any destroyed truck immediately replaced by another from continuous rotation. The Germans were witnessing an operation they could neither predict nor stop. Meanwhile, African-American drivers, still segregated and denied full recognition in the U.S., continued to dominate the operation. They drove through snow, mud, and freezing temperatures, often for days without sleep, fueled by determination, discipline, and the knowledge that their work directly supported victory. Each delivery of food, fuel, and ammunition was not just a logistical achievement. It was a moral statement, defying Nazi ideology and proving the capabilities of men often underestimated by their own country. The psychological impact on German soldiers was profound. Endless streams of headlights, the roar of engines, and the sight of continuous supplies shattered their confidence. German officers reported feeling as if they were being overwhelmed not by tanks or planes, but by a flood of trucks. Soldiers called it the river that never stops, a relentless force that ensured Allied units were always ready, always resupplied, always advancing. By mid-December, the Red Ball Express had become an unstoppable operational organism. Over 400,000 tons of supplies had been delivered, over 120 million ton miles covered, and nearly 6,000 vehicles had moved daily at peak operation. Replacement trucks, parts, and drivers were continuously fed into the system from U.S. ports, making it impossible for German forces to inflict lasting disruption. Every loss was immediately compensated, a concept German commanders could not comprehend. The operation's final triumph was in its adaptability. When some routes became impassable due to weather or enemy action, alternate paths were established within hours. When vehicles failed, mechanics repaired them on the spot or replaced them immediately. Forward units received supplies faster than they could request them, and armored divisions advanced beyond German expectations, often covering double the distance German planners had considered feasible. By the end of December 1944, the Red Ball Express had effectively paved the way for the Allies' push into Germany. Its legacy was not just measured in tons of supplies or miles traveled, but in the decisiveness of the campaign it enabled, the speed of Allied victory, and the overwhelming psychological and logistical advantage it gave over German forces. The Germans finally admitted the bitter truth. They were facing a system beyond destruction, beyond exhaustion, and beyond comprehension. The war was now being fought as much with trucks and supply chains as with tanks and artillery. The Red Ball Express had turned logistics into the ultimate weapon, and its success would influence military thinking for decades to come. Part 10 will conclude with the Red Ball Express's legacy, its post-war impact, and the lessons learned by both Americans and Germans about logistics, industry, and human endurance. By January 1945, the Red Ball Express had completed its mission. 82 days of non-stop operations, 23,000 drivers, nearly 6,000 trucks running daily, had delivered over 400,000 tons of supplies across 700 miles of liberated France, sustaining Patton's Third Army and ensuring the rapid collapse of German resistance in Western Europe. The operation that began as a desperate improvisation had become a revolution in military logistics, demonstrating that supply could be more decisive than tanks, planes, or artillery. The immediate military legacy was undeniable. German forces, once confident in their tactical superiority, had been defeated not primarily by combat units, but by American logistics. Field Marshal Model and other senior officers acknowledged the shocking truth. The Allies had created a parallel industrial civilization on wheels, capable of moving supplies faster than the Germans could destroy them. The Red Ball Express had shortened the war in Europe by an estimated 6 months, saving countless lives. Beyond the battlefield, the Red Ball Express became a catalyst for social and racial change. Approximately 75% of the drivers were African-American soldiers serving in a segregated army, denied combat roles, and subjected to discrimination at home. In Europe, they demonstrated their skill, endurance, and initiative on an unprecedented scale. Their contribution forced U.S. military leaders to reconsider policies of segregation and recognition. Eisenhower himself remarked on the courage and dedication of these drivers, noting that they were winning the war as surely as any infantry unit. The experience of Red Ball drivers also shaped post-war America's civilian logistics industry. Many veterans returned home with expertise in large-scale supply chain management, vehicle maintenance, and rapid operational planning. They founded trucking companies, helped design the interstate highway system, and transformed commercial logistics. Lessons learned in France: volume over efficiency, speed over perfection, redundancy over fragility, became core principles of American industry. German military analysis, conducted after the war, confirmed the revolutionary nature of the Red Ball Express. General Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, wrote in 1950, "The Red Ball Express proved that logistics determined strategy, not vice versa. Americans understood this, and we learned it too late. For the men who drove the Express, the operation was both grueling and historic. Many drove 48 to 72 hours straight, faced breakdowns, fires, and treacherous roads, yet morale remained high. Drivers improvised solutions in the field, demonstrated extraordinary initiative, and kept the flow of war moving regardless of obstacles. Their stories of bravery, ingenuity, and endurance became legendary. The symbolic impact on German forces was also profound. Soldiers and officers alike reported hearing phantom convoys at night, the endless sound of engines demoralizing troops even when no trucks were present. The Red Ball Express became psychological warfare, demonstrating the sheer scale of American industrial and human resources. By November 16, 1944, the Express officially ended, but its influence persisted. The methods, principles, and innovations of the operation became part of American military doctrine, shaping logistic strategy in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The Red Ball Express showed that supplies, not weapons alone, win wars, and that speed, redundancy, and initiative could overcome the most rigid enemy doctrine. On the 50th anniversary of D-Day in 1994, the United States Postal Service honored the Red Ball Express with a commemorative stamp, recognizing the driver's heroism and the operation's decisive role in the Allied victory. Veterans who attended the ceremony spoke proudly of their contribution, often recalling driving through mud, snow, and exhaustion, delivering democracy and freedom to Europe at 35 miles per hour. The Red Ball Express stands as a monument to human ingenuity, industrial power, and determination. It reshaped warfare, influenced post-war logistics, challenged racial prejudice, and proved that the ability to supply an army can be the most decisive factor in victory. German generals who once laughed at American trucks eventually surrendered to armies kept moving by them, finally understanding that the Red Ball Express had achieved what tanks, planes, and artillery alone could not. It won the war. In the end, the Red Ball Express reminds us that wars are not just fought on the front lines, but also on the roads, in the garages, and through the determination of those who keep the lifeblood of armies flowing. The trucks, the drivers, and their relentless march down the one-way highways of victory are a testament to the power of logistics and the enduring human spirit. If you want, I can also create 15 black and white historical-style image prompts for Part 1, and then continue part by part for Parts 2 to 10, keeping the same style you requested earlier. This way, you'll have a visual storyboard to match the entire Red Ball Express story.